How do you give a C# auto property an initial value? I either use the constructor or revert to the old syntax. Using the constructor. Using normal property syntax. With an initial value. Is there a better way? In C#5 and earlier. To give auto-implemented properties an initial value, you have to do it in a constructor. Since C#6.0, you can specify initial value in line. The syntax is default value attribute is intended to be used by the VS designer or any other consumer to specify a default value, not an initial value. Even if in designed object, initial value is the default value. At compile time, default value attribute will not impact the generated IL and it will not be read to initialize the property to that value C. Default value attribute is not working with my auto property. Example of attributes that impact the IL are thread static attribute, caller member name attribute, edited on January 2, 15. C#6. With C#6 you can initialize auto properties directly. Finally, there are now other answers in the thread that describe that. C#5 and below. Though the intended use of the attribute is not to actually set the values of the properties, you can use reflection to always set them anyway. When you inline an initial value for a variable, it will be done implicitly in the constructor anyway. I would argue that the syntax was best practice in C# up to 5. As this gives you clear control of the order values are assigned. As of C#6 there is a new way. Sometimes I use this. If I don't want it to be actually set and persisted in my DB. Obviously if it's not a string, then I might make the object nullable double int and check if it's null. Return a default. Or return the value it's set to. Then I can make a check in my repository to see if it's my default and not persist. Or make a backdoor check-in to see the true status of the backing value before saving. Hope that helps. In C#6.0 this is a breeze. You can do it in the class declaration itself. In the property declaration statements. Starting with C#6.0. We can assign default value to auto-implemented properties. We can also create read-only auto-implemented property like C#6, First Reactions, Initializers for Automatically Implemented Properties, by John Skeed. In version of C#6.0 and greater. You can do for read-only properties. For both writable and readable properties. In current version of C#7.0. You can do. The snippet rather displays how you can use expression-bodied get/set accessors to make is more compact when using with backing fields. In addition to the answer already accepted. For the scenario when you want to define a default property as a function of other properties, you can use expression body notation. On C#6.0 and higher for even more elegant and concise constructs like. You can use the above in the following fashion. In order to be able to use the above equals notation, the property must be read-only. And you do not use the getAccessor keyword. Details on MSDN. In C#6 and above you can simply use the syntax. Note that to have a read-only property, simply omit the set. As so. You can also assign read-only auto properties from the constructor. Prior to this I responded as below. I'd avoid adding a default to the constructor. Leave that for dynamic assignments and avoid having 2 points at which the variable is assigned, i.e. the type default and in the constructor. Typically I'd simply write a normal property in such cases. One other option is to do what ASP.NET does and define defaults via an attribute. http://msdn.microsoft.com/enus/library/system.component model.default value attribute.aspx. Little complete sample. My solution is to use a custom attribute that provides default value property initialization by constant or using property type initializer. To use this attribute, it's necessary to inherit a class from special base class initializer or use a static helper method. Usage example. Output. In the constructor. The constructor's purpose is to initialize its data members. You can simple put like this. Have you tried using the default value attribute? Or should serialize and reset methods in conjunction with the constructor? I feel like one of these two methods is necessary if you're making a class that might show up on the designer surface or in a property grid. To clarify, yes, you need to set default values in the constructor for class-derived objects. You will need to ensure the constructor exists with the proper access modifier for construction where used. If the object is not instantiated, e.g., it has no constructor, e.g., static methods, then the default value can be set by the field. The reasoning here is that the object itself will be created only once and you do not instantiate it. At Darren Kopp. Good answer. Clean. And correct. And to reiterate, you can write constructors for abstract methods. You just need to access them from the base class when writing the constructor. Constructor at base class. Constructor at derived/concrete/subclass. The point here is that the instance variable drawn from the base class may vary your base field name. Setting the current instantiated object value using this will allow you to correctly form your object with respect to the current instance and required permission levels access modifiers where you are instantiating it. Use the constructor because when the constructor is finished, construction should be finished. Properties are like states your classes hold. If you had to initialize a default state, you would do that in your constructor. Personally, I don't see the point of making it a property at all if you're not going to do anything at all beyond the auto property. Just leave it as a field. The encapsulation benefit for these items are just red herrings, because there's nothing behind them to encapsulate. If you ever need to change the underlying implementation, you're still free to refactor them as properties without breaking any dependent code. Maybe this will be the subject of its own question later. I know this is an old question, but it came up when I was looking for how to have a default value that gets inherited with the option to override. I came up with, I think this would do it for giving some flag a default of false.